What if you could incrementally adopt native views in React websites instead of starting from scratch? Expo DOM components makes this possible. I saw this tweet by the creator of Expo router, Evan Bacon, and it absolutely blew my mind. So let's take a look. Well, let's say we've built something for the web here. So we've used something like shadcn components. I've got these charts here, and then I've overall got the shadcn dashboard template. So I've got things like the table and various other things. On my site as well, I also have an MDX blog, and then we also have a threejs demo. Now, if I went to import this into native, I'm sure we would get a load of errors. So if I take a component here like dashboard.tsx, you can see we've got all of my normal imports I'd used for the shadcn template like Lucid React. Then I've got my various shadcn UI components, and it's just overall that dashboard template. What you can see is I've tried to import this into the index view of my native application here, and you see we're getting a load of errors. And that's because this can't understand things like div, span, and various other things, because the shadcn stuff was built to work with React DOM, whereas native does not use that. So if I click dismiss or minimize here, you can see we're just not going to get anything rendering out here. But we can change that with one really simple experimental directive. If I go to the component then that has the React DOM, so in my case that's dashboard, at the top here I can use that directive with use DOM, go ahead and save this and this will reload. And what you can see is I'm using React DOM now in my native app, so it's all rendering nicely and it's essentially the mobile view of my website. What this allows us to do then is get started really quickly going from a website to an iOS and Android app. And once we have this in here, what we can do is start to incrementally modify some of these components over to native views. And we can focus on the ones that need our attention the most. So maybe it's a really bad user experience, or it just doesn't come over to mobile quite well. We can modify that into a native view. The other really cool thing as well is we can start to add some native functionality to our DOM components here. So with this button here, we could have it so when we click this, it sends us a notification, it adds in haptics and various other things that we definitely couldn't have done with just a website. Now you may notice this looks a little bit odd still, so we have our header bar hidden behind here, and then we may also want some mobile navigation since we're now on an application. Well, we can add all of this in, so if I go to my layout, I can actually uncomment this line of code here. What this line of code is doing is saying if we're on the web, just return an Expo router slot, so it's just going to return the component as is, which is what's going to be rendering our website. Otherwise, if we're on mobile, we're going to render in our tabs here, and you can see we've now got some nice tab navigation down here, and we've also got the usual app layout here with the name of our application up here. So we go back to the website, you can see that's all still working fine. And this is all shared code. So any changes I make here are going to be changed in here. So if I change the name of create new order, it would change the exact same button down here. So if I go ahead and do that, if I go into my dashboard.tsx, if I go ahead and find the create new order button, and let's say I change this text to something like subscribe, something you should do to this channel for web dev content and news. You can see we've got it updated on our mobile app there. And then if I open up the website, you can see it's changed on there as well. But on this site here, we don't have any of this mobile tab stuff because as I said, we've done it in our layout. We've said if it's web, just render out the component. And if it's not, we can render this out. The other thing as well is we now have our navigation bar so we can see how the MDX looks. So what you can see here is I've got this great text content. This one's really cool because MDX is a bit of a nightmare to get working with native. So you can just do it this way and it's super simple. So now we've just got that in there. And as I said, you don't really need to focus on this view until last because this one's not too important because text content is pretty simple. The other really cool one as well is there is an emoji and shoes demo in here. So as I said, if I go to the shoes one, you'll see that's using threejs. Now, if I go to the shoes one on my native app here, you can see we've got threejs working inside of our application here on that tab. The other one as well is it does have an emoji picker. This one here is just showing that different types of libraries work with the application. So if I clicked on this link here, you'll see we've got this same emoji picker in here, and then we have this one here. The other one we have as well is we're using the TipTap library here for this editor here. And you can see we've got the same thing when we do this on our web application. And the other cool one as well is we're using an image cropper library like so. And that's a picture of Evan Bacon there, the creator of Expo router. You can see that this is the exact same sort of functionality we have if we now click on this cropper tab because it's using the exact same component, just using that new use DOM directive. Now, the repo I'm using for this demo here was made by Evan Bacon, and you can clone it yourself. I'll leave a link to this in the description, but you can see it just has a load of cool examples of different libraries working with this new use DOM directive. Now, it gets even cooler than this when we can start to integrate some native functions with our DOM elements. So if I go back to my shadcn page, you can see we have this subscribe button. So what if when I click this, I wanted to show a notification? Well, first, let's take a glance at the documentation to see how we would do this. The first thing you're going to see is this warning that DOM components are an experimental feature. So as I said, this is experimental, things may change, but I just wanted to show off how cool this could be. The other thing as well is it says use web views directly for a production ready approach. This is because many apps do already use embedded web views. The advantage of this process though is that it's going to be a single build process, and it's also just going to help with debugging code because as you saw, I'm sharing the same component. As you can see here, it says Expo offers the novel approach now with this use DOM directive, and we have how we can use it. And you saw what we did earlier where we added that use DOM directive to my web component. And then down here in our native app, we can just import that now. A couple of features to go through is it has that shared bundler config across the web, native, and DOM components. It has React, TypeScript, CSS, and all other Metro features are enabled. This is what allowed us when we were using ShadCM, which uses Tailwind, to literally just import it and it all starts to work. You can see it's going to have logging in the terminal. We saw that fast refresh and hot module reloading earlier. When I saved it, it just immediately refreshed. And you see that it has all of the other features like support for Expo Go. Another cool thing as well is it has web view props here. So if you want to change the underlying web view, you can add a DOM object to the component as it shows you here. And then you can add on some features like scroll enabled false and various different things so you can modify the web view that it's actually rendering in. The next one here is quite important to note. As you can see, you can send data to the DOM component through serializable props. So we can send the usual things like string, boolean, all of that. But it is worth noting that all of these are going to be sent asynchronously. So you can't send sync functions. And as I said, because they have to be serializable, you can't send complex data structures either. So we have that app.tsx here, and you can see we're just going to use the normal React syntax to send these serializable values down as props here. The next really cool one that I'm going to show you in a bit when we implement it ourselves is this native actions. So you can send type-safe native functions to DOM components by passing asynchronous functions as top-level props. So what you can see here is we can have this function here with that console.log, and then we're going to be able to use it in our DOM. We can actually just get that out again via the same sort of React context. But as you can see here, you cannot pass functions as nested props to DOM components. They must be top-level props. And as it says, native actions are always asynchronous, which is why we're allowed to do this as we accept only serializable arguments. The other really cool bit I want to show you as well is this explainer of how all of this is working. So it says think of these functions like React server actions, but instead of residing on the server, they live locally in the native app and communicate with the DOM component. This approach provides a powerful way to add truly native functionality to your DOM components. So that's a really good explainer, and Evan Bacon actually said this in one of his videos, where essentially these are really similar to React server components. So in React server components, we have the server JavaScript engine and then the client JavaScript engine. Whereas with these Expo DOM components, what we have is we have the Expo engine, so Hermes, and then we also have the DOM component, which is going to be the WebView JavaScript engine. So it's a little bit similar there, and that might be quite a good way to frame it in your mind for how all of this is working. The last bit as well is we have this feature detection here, which says since DOM components are used to run websites, you might need extra qualifiers to better support certain libraries. You can detect if a component is running in a DOM component with the following code. So you can do this to check is DOM, and we actually do that on my dashboard component, which I'll show you in a bit, and that's just to make sure that the routing works properly. So let's go ahead and add in some native actions to our button. As I said, this button here is a ShadCM button, so it's going to be a React DOM button. And when we click this, we want to send a native notification, something that definitely isn't possible on the web. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my index.tsx here, and I need to create a notify function as I need to be able to pass it through to my dashboard and then pick that up in my dashboard.tsx. So I've just really quickly created my notification function here. So you can see I'm importing notifications from Expo notifications. Then I've got this notify function here, which is just going to request the permissions, and then it's going to send a notification with a trigger of 1 second. What we can do on the dashboard now is we can pass this through as a prop. So if I do notify and then equals notify, we're going to have a type error for now as I need to go and add this to the dashboard itself. So at the top of this file here, if I go to where my component is defined, I can now pull through this notify function. And this notify function is just going to have a type of promise and then void. So if I do notify, that's going to be promise and void like so. Now if I go down to my onClick, so wherever our button was, I can go ahead and use that notify function from the prop that we just imported and go ahead and save this. Now, once that's refreshed, if I click on this button now, what we should see is after a second, I now get a native notification. So you can see we're getting that notification that said new subscriber and you have subscribed. Hopefully you're getting that notification as well. So you can see there, we've added some native functionality to our DOM component. This is a ShadCM button and it's sending a native notification. That is really cool. A couple other things to point out about this code as well from Evan is if we go to the index, you can see that we were importing navigate as router.navigate. So this is just passing down the Expo router navigation prop. And we use this in the dashboard at the top as we've replaced all of the links with something called a DOM link. What you can see with this DOM link here is it's taking in that navigation function. And all we're doing is when we click on a button, if we are in a DOM component, instead of using the normal navigation, what we do is we just prevent the normal and then we use Expo router to navigate instead. The cool thing about this is we're using that is DOM feature check there. So this is how we're checking whether we're in the DOM or not. Now, the last thing I want to see is how quickly I can take some of my existing web React code and put that into this native React DOM view. So I was recently working with pragmatic drag and drop. So if I go to my components here and then I start something and let's say drag drop, I actually have my components here ready to drag over. So if I go ahead and select them on this screen here, what I can do is I can go ahead and drag these into my drag and drop. Now I know I don't need the index.css here as that's just going to be Tailwind. What I can do instead is I can go into my list. And then in my list.tsx, I just need to use the use DOM at the top here. Use DOM like so. So I can do import, and then that's going to be @global.css like so. If I go ahead and save this now, I also need to go ahead and install these pragmatic drag and drop packages. And with my packages installed, I now need to use my list.tsx component somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace my dashboard one here. If I do something like list, and then do that, and then make sure we import this from the correct file here. So let me add in the import from the drag and drop. Let's go ahead and save this and reload, and hopefully we get my drag and drop list inside of this native view. With that refreshed, it looks like we have one error, which is that this needs to be a default export. So I change this to export default list. Then I go back to where my index was, and I make sure I update this import to use the default import. We go ahead and save this, and now wait for this to reload. And there you go. Once that's reloaded, you can see I'm now using pragmatic drag and drop inside of my native view here by using that use DOM directive. And you see this is all working quite nicely, and this was all styled with Tailwind. I'll leave a link to this repo in the description down below that had this drag and drop example in it as well. And you can also see when I go to my web code now, I've got the exact same thing, and it's looking and working in the exact same way. What you can see with this is just how quickly I can go from a website to my native view and then start to incrementally update some of this to actually work a bit better. And you just see it's going to enable iteration speed to be so much higher. So you've seen all of these awesome features then, but what's the catch going to be? I've been trying to collate all of this information from the documentation as well as Evan's tweets, but remember this is all experimental, so some of this could change. The first one that I did see though is that the first iteration of this likely won't have over-the-air updates. Another one as well is that web views do often just have worse performance than the native views, but this is meant to be a tool in migration anyway, so I don't see this as too much of a downside. Also, as we saw earlier with the props, they can be passed async and they only support serial arguments, so you can't pass in any sync functions or complex types. And the last one that I found is that these DOM components are self-contained. That means they don't share the JavaScript globals or React context, but I did see they are thinking of adding a shared React context object to use across this boundary, so this may change in the future. So there we go. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of this experimental feature. I think it's going to massively help with iteration speed from website to application. Go ahead and watch this video that YouTube thinks you'll like. As always, please subscribe, happy coding, and see you in the next video.